This is the last thing they ever wrote. God is over all. 3 grown men, seasoned lighthouse keepers, vanished from a tiny island. No bodies, no signs of struggle. Just a single, chilling message scrawled into the logbook. A message that makes no sense. You're about to hear the story of the Flannan Isles mystery. A ghost story, but one that is absolutely real. What happened on that lonely rock off the coast of Scotland is one of the biggest unsolved disappearances of all time. We're going to walk through the final hours of these men, and I'm going to lay out the darkest theories about what could have dragged them away from their post. Because once you see the details, you'll realize this wasn't just a simple accident. Imagine this place, the Flannan Isles. They call it the Seven Hunters. It's a group of small, totally deserted islands way out in the North Atlantic, just miles from the coast of Scotland. Most of the islands are just patches of grass and rock. But one of them, a little piece of land called Island Moor, has this huge, beautiful, and absolutely necessary lighthouse. The lighthouse itself had only been running for about a year. It was a new, state-of-the-art structure, a fortress built against the harsh reality of the sea. To keep it going, you needed a team of 4 keepers. But on a rotation, only 3 of them were ever on the island at one time. They'd do shifts, usually 6 weeks on, 2 weeks off. It was a tough, lonely job, but it was important. These lights saved lives. The 3 men who were there for the shift in December of 1900 were Thomas Marshall, James Ducat, and Donald MacArthur. These weren't kids or rookies. They were all experienced professional keepers. James Ducat, he was the principal keeper, the head guy. He was a veteran, a solid professional. He'd been in the service for years. He was the one who was supposed to be in charge, the steady hand on the rudder, so to speak. Then there was Thomas Marshall, the second keeper. He was known as a quiet, thoughtful man. And finally, Donald MacArthur, the third keeper. Now, Donald was the opposite of Thomas. He was known to be a bit of a short-fused guy, a bit hot-headed, the kind of person who could get into an argument over something tiny. So, you have these 3 different personalities stuck together on a barren rock, miles from anyone, with nothing but the ocean and the sound of the wind for company. And their job, to keep the light burning no matter what.
Their rotation was supposed to end on December 20th. That was the day the relief boat, the Hesperus, was scheduled to come and swap them out. But long before the Hesperus even set sail, things started to go wrong. The first sign that something was off actually came earlier, on December 15th, 1900. A steamer ship, the Archon, was sailing past the Flannan Isles on its way to Leith. The captain of the Archon noticed something that was so strange, so unbelievable, that he wrote it down in his ship's log immediately. The captain noted that the Island Moor lighthouse was not working. The light was out. Now, this is huge. This is not like a light bulb going out in your house. The system for this lighthouse was designed to be virtually fail-safe. They had multiple backups, massive amounts of oil, and 3 highly trained men whose entire one and only job was to make sure that light never went dark. For it to be out meant something was seriously, fundamentally broken. Or something else entirely. The captain of the Archon reported the failure immediately when he got to port, but the weather in the North Atlantic, it's a beast. It's not like today where you can just send a helicopter right out. The seas were so violent, the waves so enormous that it took a full 5 days before the relief vessel, the Hesperus, could even try to make the voyage. 5 days. And this waiting period, this gap in time where they knew the light was out but couldn't get there, This is where the real horror begins, because you start to imagine what could have happened in that silence. Finally, on December 26th, Christmas Day, having already passed, the Hesperus arrived at Eilean Moor. The man in charge of the relief mission was Joseph Moore. He was the fourth keeper in the rotation, the one who should have been there but was thankfully on shore leave. As the Hesperus approached, Moore stood on the deck, peering through the driving rain and the mist at the island. The very first thing he noticed was the utter, complete silence. There was no flag raised on the flagstaff. No one was on the landing platform to greet them. And most chillingly, the supply box, the little trolley they used to haul supplies up the sheer cliffs, was still sitting at the landing stage. No one had even bothered to lower it to the boat. It was just sitting there, untouched. It was like they hadn't been expecting anyone.
Joseph Moore tried to use the ship's horn to get their attention. He blew it over and over, the sound echoing off the sheer black rock cliffs. Nothing. Just the wind, the waves, and that crushing silence. So Joseph Moore and a few of the sailors climbed up the steep path to the lighthouse. The journey itself is brutal. You have to climb over 100 feet up to reach the door. And as they climbed, everything was just wrong. The door to the main lighthouse tower was unlocked. That is a huge, screaming problem. Lighthouse keepers are meticulous about security. They're trained to always keep the door locked because of the power of the storms. An unlocked door meant someone left in a hurry, or they were totally distracted. Moore pushed the heavy iron door open and walked inside. The entire atmosphere was weirdly calm but totally unsettling. The first thing he saw was a kitchen. A half-eaten meal of meat, potatoes, and pickles was sitting on the table. It was set for 3 men. The meal was cold, but it looked like they had simply stood up and walked away mid-bite. On the floor nearby, a chair was knocked over. Now, think about that. A meal left unfinished. A chair knocked over. In a space where 3 professional men lived and worked? It instantly opens a huge loop in your brain. Why did they stop eating? Why was the chair down? Did something happen right there?
Moore moved through the rest of the tower. He checked the beds. They were all made perfectly. Nothing looked wrong there. He checked the oilskins, the thick waterproof jackets and pants they wore to go outside in storms. There were 3 sets, but only 2 were missing. Ducat and Marshall's oilskins were gone. MacArthur's, the third keeper, were still hanging on their hooks. This is another huge information gap, right? Why were 2 men dressed for a storm and the third was not? If they all went outside together, why did one leave his foul-weather gear? If the 2 dressed men went to rescue the undressed one, why did the undressed man's clothes stay behind? Was he already gone? Was he running out in a panic? It's completely backwards. Moore eventually made his way to the lamp room, the very top of the tower where the light should have been blazing. Everything was in perfect order. The lamps were cleaned, polished, and ready to be lit. The curtains were drawn. It was as if a ghost crew had prepped the light and then just evaporated. There were no problems with the machinery, which ruled out the original idea that the light was out due to a mechanical failure. The light had simply never been lit.
But the most disturbing discovery, the one that seals this entire thing in the Book of Nightmares, was the Logbook, the official daily journal that recorded everything that happened on Isle Moor. Moore found the logbook and started flipping back through the entries. He saw the neat, professional handwriting of the 3 keepers recording the usual things: weather, oil consumed, maintenance done. But as he got closer to December 15th, the tone changed. It became less professional, more frantic, and weirdly personal. On December 12th, Principal Keeper James Ducat, the veteran, wrote about a storm. Not just a storm, he described it as a gale, a major one that had been battering the island for days. But here is the thing that makes you pause. The weather reports from the mainland showed no such major gale on the 12th. The weather was bad, sure, but not what Ducat described. Did he overreact? Or was the weather on that tiny rock somehow worse than anyone could imagine? The entry for the 13th is where it gets truly unsettling. Marshall, the quiet man, wrote that the storm was still raging, and he also made a note that MacArthur, the hot-tempered man, was weeping. Weeping! A seasoned, burly lighthouse keeper reduced to tears by the weather. He also wrote that James Ducat, the principal keeper, the unshakable leader, was very quiet, almost withdrawn. And Marshall himself? He finished the entry by saying, "I am praying." 3 experienced, tough men, all completely terrified for reasons that only they knew. But then comes the final entry, December 15th, the last entry. Scrawled in the logbook only a few words that defy any logical explanation, words that have haunted this case for over a century. Storm ended. Sea calm. God is over all.
That's the key moment, the absolute climax of the story. Think about what that log entry means. If the storm had truly ended, if the sea was calm, why did they vanish? Why were 2 men dressed for a storm if the weather was fine? It's a complete contradiction. It closes the loop on the storm theory, but it opens a much, much darker one. After finding the logbook, Joseph Moore and his men searched the rest of the island for days. They found one last tiny detail that makes this mystery absolutely maddening. On the western landing platform, which was over 100 feet above sea level, they found one thing: a single twisted railing and a huge chunk of rock missing from the walkway. It looked like a massive wave. An unbelievable wave had washed over the platform. The official conclusion, the one the government went with, was that a huge rogue wave, a freak of nature, had crashed over the platform, dragged the 3 men out to sea, and that the men's logs were maybe confused or they just misremembered the dates. The 2 men with oilskins were maybe trying to secure something, and the 3rd ran out without his gear to help, and they were all swept away. It's a perfectly neat, logical conclusion, a way to tie up the messy end of a terrifying real-life ghost story. But that explanation is just too neat, and it leaves way too many loops wide open. Let's be real. Do you believe that story? Let's talk about the theories, the real theories, the ones people whisper about when the lights are low. Because the official story doesn't explain the fear. It doesn't explain the weeping man. It doesn't explain the final terrifying entry that read, "God is over all." Let's go back to the moment Joseph Moore, the relief keeper, first set foot on Island Moore. It's December 26th. The air is heavy, thick with the smell of brine and damp rock. The island itself is a black, jagged tooth jutting out of the gray, churning North Atlantic. As he climbed up from the Hesperus, the sound of the boat's engine faded, and all that was left was the vast, echoing roar of the ocean. It was a sound that didn't just fill your ears, it seemed to fill your skull. A perpetual, suffocating noise that would grind down a man's nerves over weeks and months. The sheer verticality of the cliff face, the spray from the waves hitting 100 feet up. It was a truly humbling, terrifying place. And the path, the one they had to climb up, was treacherous. Slabs of rock slick with moss and cold seawater. And there at the top was this massive stone tower, the lighthouse, sitting like a fortress, silent. No one waving, no sign of life. That image, that silence against the chaos of the sea, is the real start of the horror.
Moore reached the door, that heavy iron beast, and he tried the handle. It was unlocked. You can't overstate how much of a red flag that is. It's not just a rule they break. It's a fundamental safety instinct. The weather out there, even on a calm day, could be lethal. To leave the door open is to invite the sea itself inside. It's a level of negligence that 3 veteran keepers would simply never commit. It tells you that whatever made them leave that door unsecured was more terrifying than the thought of the sea coming in. It was a sudden, violent break from all routine. It was panic, maybe, or an emergency so immediate they didn't have time to stop and secure their own lives. Inside the tower, it got weirder. The kitchen, the heart of the men's living space, was frozen in time. The meal half-eaten. 3 plates, meat, potatoes, pickles. It was a solid, hearty meal, but it was sitting there, stone cold. Now think about the simple action of eating. You're sitting down, you're unwinding, you're safe, finally out of the elements. And for all 3 men to stop eating at the same time, that is the sound of a panic button being hit. Something must have happened that was so urgent, so impossible to ignore, that 3 men instantly pushed back their chairs, one of them even knocking a chair over, and ran. They didn't grab a coat, they didn't grab a weapon, they just moved. Whatever they saw or heard was a perfect, synchronous trigger for absolute, unadulterated terror. Moore continued his search, his boots echoing on the spiral staircase, the sound feeling too loud in the sudden, man-made silence. Everything was in order, which is the most terrifying part. The place wasn't ransacked. It wasn't destroyed. It was just empty. The beds were made. Everything was tidy. Except for one place, the clock. The clock, which was a critical piece of equipment for keeping the log and timing the light, had stopped. And it wasn't just run down, it was broken. It had stopped at an unknown time, its hands frozen. It's a small detail, but it speaks volumes about the sudden end of routine. The moment that clock stopped, the men's measured, professional world ended. Then there are the oilskins. 2 missing, 1 left behind. This detail, more than almost any other, screams confusion and desperation. If one man went out for an emergency, the other 2 would follow to help. If the weather was a rogue wave event, why would one man not grab his jacket? It suggests an order of events that is completely disjointed. Maybe 2 men went out, and the third, Donald MacArthur, the hothead, refused. He was scared. He had been weeping days before. He stayed inside, safe, but then something made him run, without his jacket, out into the very thing he was afraid of. Or maybe, and this is the most unnerving thought, maybe he was the first one to go, already in a state of undress or inside, and the other 2 went to investigate or to retrieve him, wearing their proper gear. And whatever got him, got them too. The one set of oilskins left behind, hanging on its hook, feels like a dark piece of evidence that tells a story of one man's final, panicked decision. When Moore finally got to the western landing platform, the damage there was just unreal. This platform, as I said, is over 100 feet up, well above the reach of any normal storm surge. But a railing, a thick iron railing that would take a crane to bend, was twisted and mangled. A huge section of rock and concrete, the actual foundation of the walkway, had been ripped out. The power it would take to do that is almost impossible to comprehend. If it was a rogue wave, it was a wave of biblical, unbelievable proportions. A wave that should have shattered the lantern at the top of the tower, should have ripped the door right off its hinges. But all the damage was localized to this one spot, this one landing platform. It's like the wave, or whatever it was, knew exactly where it wanted to hit. And then you come back to the logbook. The logbook is the ghost speaking. The entries from the 12th and 13th, the terror of these men, Marshall praying, Ducat silent, MacArthur weeping. These men are professionals. They've been in storms before. This wasn't just bad weather. This was a psychological breakdown caused by something they were experiencing. And it wasn't just a quick scare. It was something that lasted for days, something that completely eroded their will and their sense of control. And the final entry, December 15th. Storm ended. Sea calm. God is over all. This is the open loop that you just can't close. If the storm had ended, the seas were calm, the men would have been relieved.
They would have been doing maintenance, fixing the damage, maybe even joking about it. They would not have disappeared. That line, "God is over all," is not a sign of relief. It is a desperate, final invocation. It's a man looking at something so far outside of his reality that he is reaching for the only thing he has left, his faith. It's a line scrolled by someone who has just witnessed the impossible and knows he is next. It's the moment of resignation before the horror consumes them. It feels like a plea for mercy.
There's another small, chilling piece of detail in the official investigation reports that often gets missed. The men's wages for the month were still sitting untouched in their drawers. They hadn't taken anything of value. They didn't run away. 3 men, 3 lives, 3 distinct personalities, all erased in one sudden horrifying moment. The lighthouse, which was built to save lives, became a tomb. The official inquiry, led by Robert Muirhead, the superintendent of Northern Lighthouse Board, was thorough. They checked for foul play, for a surprise visit from a ship, for anything rational, and they came up empty every single time. Muirhead was the one who reluctantly concluded it had to be a rogue wave, because what else could he say? He couldn't write "ghosts" in an official report. But even he admitted later the entire thing felt like a terrifying, inexplicable dream. The evidence simply did not support the conclusion. It was a conclusion reached out of necessity, not proof. Think about the men. Thomas Marshall. He was the religious one, the one who wrote he was praying. James Ducat, the veteran, the rock, the one who went silent, completely paralyzed by a fear he couldn't name. And Donald MacArthur, the one who wept. They were destroyed mentally, days before they were destroyed physically. And whatever did this, it didn't just kill them. It broke their very souls. It stripped them of their professionalism, their bravery, everything they were. And all it left behind was a perfectly clean lamp room and an unfinished meal. The true horror of the Flannan Isles isn't the vanishing, it's the implication of the logbook. It's the idea that something out there in the sea is so powerful, so evil, that it can break 3 experienced men, make them pray and weep, and then take them without leaving a trace, leaving a final message that seals their terror. God is over all. It's the ultimate statement of helplessness. It means we are not in control. No matter how you look at the story, whether you believe in a wave the size of a mountain or you believe in something ancient and hungry, the fundamental truth remains. 3 men were wiped from existence on a tiny, isolated rock. And the final clue, the one they left us, is less of a clue and more of a warning. A warning scrawled on December 15th, 1900, right before the silence. And no one has ever found an answer that makes any real sense. The lighthouse stands there, a beautiful, terrifying monument to a question that will never be answered. So the mystery of the Flannan Isles remains one of the greatest maritime puzzles. The storm theory is easy, it's tidy, but it doesn't account for the human element, the deep, crippling terror that was recorded in that logbook. It doesn't explain the chair on the floor, the untouched oilskins, or that final desperate message. All the official records are now just part of the story. A story where 3 men faced something so far beyond the scope of a weather report that their last act was not to fight or to flee, but to acknowledge a power greater than themselves. The light, the symbol of safety, went dark. And whatever happened that night, we only have one message from the darkness, a prayer.
Hit subscribe to hear the next chapter in the world's greatest cold cases.